So what do the top players play? We're going to do a bit of a series on what's in the bags, the pros bags and what you can learn from it. So it seems pertinent to start with the player that's dominated 2024, Scottie Scheffler. Look at what he has in the bag. There's some interesting clubs in there. What can it teach you and what can you implement and take into your own game into the future? So starting with the driver, Scottie's been using the QI10 series. Now it is the core model, not the LS. So it's not the one with the movable weight at the front. So it isn't a low loft. He's playing an 8 degree that's lofted to measure 8 1/4. So it's a very low loft. That in itself creates low spin. But I think what's important to note with this is you'd think with his speed, with his ball flight, with how far he hits it, that the LS, the low spin model, would have been the one he's been playing. But it hasn't been. It's been what they call the core model. So what we noted this year is the QI10 core model brought spin down a little bit more versus previous series. So as a result, actually quite a lot of the top players, Rory included, is in the standard model rather than the LS. This mitigates a little bit of that low spin one that knuckles for them. It maintains carry distance. It's not quite as extreme in terms of setup. And so because the heads have got so efficient in terms of flight, we've seen a lot of the top players playing actually a head that retains a little bit of spin. Now their technique's brilliant. So they actually deliver the club so well that rather than using a club head to keep the top of the flight down, most of the top players now are starting to use a head that retains a bit of flight. Now, this is actually slightly different to what we see for amateurs, where we're actually looking to diminish the spin to keep that forward flight, where a player's maybe a little less technically gifted, but also a little less efficient in their flight. We're needing the low spin model for more amateurs than actually sometimes the top pros are playing. But where he's got what is reported to be a very slightly lighter shade of colour on the face that also helps him see the face a little bit more. Now, when you've got that little loft, it can be an alignment thing. See, TaylorMade with their models have got that lighter colour strip across the top. That's an alignment aid in particular. It frames the top of the face, where in the past they've had lighter coloured crowns. It's had a contrast between the face and the crown. That gives you that contrast from an alignment, and certainly that's potentially one of the reasons Scottie's done that. But it helps just to see the loft, and from a setup point of view, that might be something that's a personal preference. Functionally does nothing else, purely a visual thing. But having that low loft head, but in the standard model, keeps the spin down from the loft, but the flight up from the head style. Now, he pairs it with the original model Ventus Black 7X. Very stout shaft. So 78 grams, very stable tip. The Velocor material really reduces the spin on this. Balance point a little down the bottom end. Now we know with Scottie's action that club needs to drop down into line for him. So that balance point helps him drop the club into, keep it in plane, drop it under line, control the club face. He plays a 45-inch length, which is actually shorter than most of the off-the-rack drivers, something definitely to take from there. Too long is hard to control, so the best player in the world is not playing the same length as the retail models. Something we do here is shorten drivers a heck of a lot versus the standard off-the-rack length, and that's absolutely something you can take from this. But a D4 swing weight, fairly strong swing weight, but based on the weight of the shaft and the balance point, not wildly out there in terms of setup. So that covers the driver. We now move on to the fairway wood. So consistencies here are QI10 model, again, the core model, the fixed hosel. Now, a lot of the pros like the cleanliness of the lines through the fixed hosel rather than when it's got the adjustable adapter. It makes that a little bit wider, which visually the pros like that clean line. But again, the LS is a very low spin head. And for Scottie, like with the driver, he has this lofted down. He has a 15 degree lofted down a little bit. There is a video online that you can find of TaylorMade actually bending his head a little bit lower loft. That's taken it from 15 to 14 3/4. Doesn't sound like a lot, but again, when you're looking at the minutiae of the details and the data these players are playing to, it just hits that perfect flight window of launch and spin for him. The core model is a pretty low spin head, so that necessity to go into the LS model, the Tour model, to bring that flight down even further isn't something he needs. But actually there's a bit more forgiveness from this head. And again, with the kind of courses they're playing, that extra bit of forgiveness, stability across the face, just something that he feels is an advantage and hits the flight window he's looking for. As with the driver, in the original model Ventus Black, but this time the 8X. So we're up at 88 grams for this. Again, very stable tip. Balance point the same as the 7X in the driver. Again, helps just keep the club on plane and on line for him. Really stable, really tight feeling. Definitely something he's going to feel confident with. He plays this a little shorter than, again, off the rack. off the rack lengths are 43.25 to 43.5 in a 3-wood. He places at 42 and 5/16. So a little lighter swing rate at D3, but again, shorter than standard. Again, a lesson there. Woods are hard to hit. The longer the club length, the more club you've got to get back to the ball. It's hard to do consistently. So definitely learn from his setup there and look at, if you're struggling with your driver and fairway wood from a strike point of view or a consistency point of view, bring that length down a little bit, will certainly help you. We'll move on to the irons. So moving into the iron part of Scottie's bag. So in the bulk of his irons, he plays the P7TW, the Tiger Woods 5-iron through pitch wedge. He plays that blade. It's a pure blade, really incredibly unforgiving, but ultimately the less tech you have in a head, the more consistency for that level of player you get. So there's no tech, there's no fast face, catapulting or ball speed. There's nothing in there that other than ball strike, which is going to govern the launch and the spin and obviously the loft that club gives him each shot to shot. So there's no extra layer of anything that could change the performance in any shape or form. So for him, 5-iron down, it's all about not getting more distance than he thinks he's going to get. That's really critical for the top players. In the scoring zone, in that sort of, well, for him it's probably 215, 220 yards and down, he wants to know exactly how far that iron's going to go. So a pure blade with no tungsten weighting, no tech other than a bit of CG positioning, that means that what he puts in, he gets out. Now, so for a lot of us, that's not a good thing. We want a little bit of help. But for him, one of the world's best ball strikers, and certainly the stability of that club face through the ball means that he's going to know the moment he strikes it exactly what he's getting out of it. So he plays those heads 5-iron through pitch. Now in the body of his irons, he's in the Dynamic Gold, the Taurus U X100s. So the difference between the Taurus U and the non-Taurus U is actually a lot less than people think. What the Taurus U irons are, they're the same structure as shaft, but they are hand-picked across the set for consistency of weight through. So the tolerances are as small as they can possibly be. Now, Scottie's going to get the ones that are the tightest tolerance of the tightest tolerance. So the structure of the shaft is exactly the same as the normal X100, but the Taurus U, they are batched into a set so that the weights are as spot on as possible. So that's what he plays in the irons. So they're, again, weight-wise, 131 grams, stable through the midsection, even balance. So there's not an overall kind of funky weight distribution through the shaft. There's just a decent amount of weight, which again, he's strong enough to use that weight to make the timing work. But a lot of stability with that midsection in particular and into the tip. So lots of control. Where it does get interesting is in the 3 and the 4-iron. So the head changes. So Scottie changes in the 4-iron. So now this is the current version of it, but it's a SRIXON driving iron. So it goes from the P7TW5 to pitch into it's the ZU85 that he's using, which is an older model of this particular club. So what does that give him? So in the 4-iron, it's the same Dynamic Gold Taurus U shaft. So the only change is the head. So what this head gives him is a little bit of width to the bottom there, so moving the weight back off the face. The further back you put the weight, the more stability off center, the less twist. So it gives him margin of error, but also there's a faster face. So what that gives him is ball speed progression versus where his blade 4-iron is going to be. This head will have a lower CG and a further back CG, center of gravity. That means more forgiveness, higher launch, but the thinner face also then means faster ball speed. So you get higher launch, spin less high than a blade would be. Strange enough, you might think that's odd, but actually the moment you lower center of gravity, you're striking it above the CG line more easily. So you might launch it higher, but proportionally the spin comes out lower, which means a more efficient flight, more distance, but that faster face gives him a bit of extra pop to make sure you get the distance gains that he's looking for at this part of the bag. It then gets more interesting in the 3-iron. So it's the same head as his ZU85 3-iron head. Now, the change in this is we then move into a different shaft. So it was a prototype of this model, the Nippon Gost, GOST, which stands for graphite on steel. So it's a steel core with a graphite outer layer. And what that does is it utilizes the properties of both steel and graphite. So steel, you get some of the mass without the harshness, and then the graphite vibration dampens a little bit, but it adds to those outer layers a bit of rigidity. Now, relative to weight, graphite is stronger than steel. So it adds that little bit of extra rigidity, but keeps the dead weight down. So what it allows Scottie to do is go to a shaft that is roughly 100 grams, just over 100 grams, from his 125 gram 4-iron shaft. So he's losing 25 grams worth or thereabouts of dead weight in the shaft. What does that do? Helps with a bit of speed. So I'm going to demonstrate that using my own 4-iron, which has a 115 gram shaft, with a shaft that's the same representative difference at 85, 88 grams. That's a 25 odd gram difference, and see what swing speed progression I get. So I have a similar setup to Mr. Scheffler, and then I play a blade 5 to pitch, and then I go into a head with a little bit of tech on the 4-iron, but the same shaft. So let's see what club speed I can get with my 4-iron. So solid strike there. So club speed 93.6. So not bad at all for an old-timer who doesn't play full-time. So what we'll be looking to do by dropping dead weight into the 3-iron is lighter shaft, more speed, more club speed, more ball speed, more ball speed, more height, and more ball speed, more carry distance. So it's that progression of shot distance into the top end of the bag, and utilizing both head tech and shaft tech to generate that little bit more than you would have done just playing the same clubs through into a 4 and a 3-iron. So let's see what swing speed I can get by dropping that same 20, 25 gram weight. So it moves a lot more easily, and gone from 93.6, I've gone 97.8. So what we can see from that is I'd ordinarily expect same components and just the longer shaft to pick up a couple of miles an hour. I've picked up another 2 miles an hour or so by going into the lighter shaft. So that gives me the potential to increase the ball speed by another 3 miles an hour, which then guarantees me getting that distance progression, which is exactly why Scottie's doing that in the top part of the bag. And for him, it also helps him potentially hit a particular flight window again, height, feel, just get exactly what he needs from that part of the bag. So let's now go right down the bottom, have a look at the wedges. So Mr. Scheffler goes into VOKEYs. Now, no, they're not the SM10s, which these ones are, because we've got these in the studio, but he goes from his Tiger Woods P7TW irons in the pitch wedge into VOKEY wedges down the bottom. So he's got SM8s. Now that he must like the shape of the head. They have changed the leading edge lines, the top lines, the toe lines a little bit through the different series. So for him to stay in the SM8 shape, there will be newly made heads, so there won't be old SM8s, but to still be in the SM8s, he must prefer the shape and potentially a little bit of the grinds. The grinds adapt very, very slightly, but in the 50s, in a 50 degree 12F, and then a 56 14F. So on the two lower lofts, he plays the full grind. And by full grind, that means that progression goes all the way through to the back edge. So there's lots of bounce on that back edge. Now with the turfs he's playing off, particularly in the US, absolutely having a higher bounce wedge helps with some of those softer grasses, the softer, one would say root structure. So over here, it's a little bit of a finer grass, the roots go in a little bit deeper, and it's a firmer base structure to the turf, whereas in the States, a lot overseeded. So you get a softer base to the grass, and that back edge just stops it digging in quite as much, but gives him better turf interaction for the way he plays. Now Scottie delivers the wedge very much more. He's not rotating and leading edge. It's almost more kind of down the line that way, has incredibly little face rotation. So he's really using that back edge to gauge the depth and to give him low point control, flight control, strike point. It'll manage the strike point up the face as well. So he goes into the F grinds in both the 50 and the 56. And then into the 60, he's got a prototype in an SM9. It was a prototype for the T grind. Now, it will vary very slightly from this. It will be ground to his own specifications. But the T grind, you can see here, that back edge really graduates off. So what that allows him to do, that trailed back edge, means that he can really set that club out heavily open and not have the leading edge sat really proud. So there's a lot of versatility around the greens for those get out of jail shots. He's got a massive differential between the higher bounce on the 56 and in that trail back edge on the 60. So he can pretty much turn in the 60 degree and have almost negative bounce, open up his 56 and have a ton of bounce. So it gives him a huge amount of versatility. And for the types of shots he plays, that grind is going to be really dialed into his specific way of playing, face rotation, depth, angle of attack, feel. He's going to be dialed into his feel as well of how that clubhead goes through the turf and the sand, and confidence. I have massive confidence in those wedges. He does stay in the Dynamic Gold Tourist shafts, goes into the S400, So the dead weight goes up a little bit off the X100s. That's where the 100 to 400 denomination comes in there. There's a 100, 200, 300 and 400. So it's the heaviest end of the scale. But going into the S400 means it's a softer, slightly softer flex. It feels a little bit more responsive, which in the wedges where you're not working the shaft hard and loading it hard, you get that little bit more kick and feedback and a bit more softness and touch to the shaft, something that he has an awful lot of with the way he plays his shots. So putters. Now Scottie has flitted around with putters over the years, but he's really settled on the TAYLORMADE, the Spider Tour X. So there are a few different molds. They've done the Z and the V where the weight's forward or back, but this is the original Tour X shape. So it's got that true path alignment on the top. It's got the softer urethane insert on the face as well, but it's got that weight back. And that head style gives him loads of stability, and he's really, ever since going to that putter, he's started to putt really quite well. And when someone who's that good at ball striking putts well, what happens week in, week out is he just obliterates the field, as he's just done in Albany. But the key things with this putter is he's gone the L neck, so plumber's neck. So that's to give him a little bit of toe hang, a little bit of face rotation, which helps to feel the face a bit more. Now there's a trend towards the zero torque putters, torque balanced, so taking any rotation around the shaft out, any gearing. Scottie hasn't done that. He's wanting that little bit of toe hang, toe flow, just to get some feel. It just matches the way that he rotates the face through the ball. What he did do this last weekend, just scored, is he experimented with grip. Now, this was an experiment, but chances are, having just shot a 62 in the last round and 1x6, we might be seeing more of this. So he plays a very traditional shape, kind of pistol shaped putter grip, where it's a fairly conventional sizing, but it has, as we can see on the grip end here, that slightly kind of tapered back edge. That's what we call by a pistol shape. So what does that do? It sits in the hand. If I take the crook of my hands there, that shape sits in the crook of the hand there. So it really fits into the fingers there. But what he's done is gone from what we might call a conventional grip, which is this one here, it's a reverse overlap, which he still uses on the long putts because you get a little bit more leverage of the hands there. And he's taken the right hand and trying out a claw. So what the claw does is it essentially nullifies the right hand. So you're trying to take the right hand out of the stroke and make it softly kind of supporting the putter, and then it's just shoulders back and through without any hand action. So trying to minimize any of that variation on the shorter putts. The interesting bit is he stayed with the smaller grip, because a lot of the players, there are some grips now that are designed for the claw, such as a lambkin and a super stroke. But what we'll see from these is they have much wider, flatter sections on the front. So if you're putting your hand that way on them, there's actually plenty of grip to rest your hand on, rather than just that narrow section we saw on the other one. So with these grips, you get a flat side section or flat top section, depending if you claw that way or pencil grip that way around. And they're designed for this grip style. So if you're going to learn anything from what Scottie's done this week, is there's no harm in experimenting. Try it. If it works, stick with it. If it doesn't work, that's fine. You can go back to what you're doing before. But if you do change your grip style, then there are loads of grip shapes out there that can help the hands settle comfortably on the club and keep control. But it's quite simply, if the world number one is trying something different, then it shows that it's worth experimenting for us as well. And the other bit, ball-wise, Scottie's using the TITLEIST Pro V1. So there are several variants out on tour. It just states the standard Pro V, so it doesn't look like it's one of the other iterations. However, that is to be confirmed, but he's in a TITLEIST golf ball nonetheless. He has used the X as well as the standard Pro V, but currently in the standard Pro V1. So what can we take from Scottie's bag? Well, he's using 4 different brands in there. He's got TAYLORMADE woods, TAYLORMADE irons, SRIXON driving iron, 3 brands, sorry. TAYLORMADE, SRIXON, TITLEIST. TAYLORMADE driver fairway wood and irons, SRIXON driving irons, TITLEIST wedges, TITLEIST ball, TAYLORMADE putter. So there's absolutely no harm in having what might appear a mishmash of clubs in the bag. I do it. I have a TITLEIST driver, Callaway fairway wood, SRIXON driving iron, PXG4 iron, Mura blades, TITLEIST wedges, Bettinardi putter. Why? Because it works. And for these guys as well, they just want to use what works best, because that's led him to earning lots of millions of dollars this year, because he's going to earn more and do better by using what works rather than just blanketing a brand across his bag. And there are several players that have done this over the years. Brooks Koepka also famously playing a real variety of clubs. Some of the flagship players are the poster boys for the brands. Someone like Rory is TaylorMade through and through. However, he used a TITLEIST VOKEY wedge in Dubai when he won recently. Interesting. But Play what works for you. There's a reason why it works for you, so stick with it. If you can do it with a brand that you like and that gives you confidence, even better. But they play what works because they play better. That's certainly what you can take from Scottie's bag.